A billionaire father was about to say goodbye to his son when the poor girl noticed a detail everyone had overlooked. An hour later, the child was opening his eyes in a private clinic in a business district hidden by gleaming glass buildings. Mornings began not with coffee and conversation, but with the shrill whir of medical monitors. Ward number 7 was considered the most heavily guarded in the entire building. 2 guards stood at the cell door, in a corridor on a closed floor. Here lay a boy, simply named Patient, but everyone knew who he was. 7 years old, almost skinny, so translucent that light seemed to penetrate his skin. His hands lay on the snow-white sheets, fingers trembling with a barely perceptible tremor. Every breath was becoming harder. The air seemed to grow heavier by the minute. The machines were registering an unsteady rhythm, but couldn't reveal the reason. And that was the most frightening thing. 17 doctors stood around the bed, the best of the best, summoned from across the country, some flown in overnight, some by personal helicopter. World-renowned cardiologists, neurologists, toxicologists who had written books and participated in international investigations. 2 professors, 3 department heads, private consultants, white coats, serious faces, tablets in hand, and none had an answer. The pressure is dropping again, the resuscitator said softly, without looking up from the screen. Oxygen levels are normal, the nurse replied. No deviations in the tests, the lab assistant said, handing over the printout. The department head, with his white temples and tired eyes, took off his glasses and gently placed them on his nose. In his 30 years of practice, he had seen many things, but this was the first time he had seen such symptoms, and the cause seemed to dissolve into thin air. A few steps away from the bed, the boy's father stood. The expensive suit fit perfectly, but now it looked like someone else's. An unnecessary tie, a shirt button undone, more than etiquette allowed. He stared at his son unblinkingly, as if afraid that if he looked away, he would lose him forever. I don't understand, he said softly, addressing everyone at once. I gave you the best equipment, any money, any expertise. Why is my son dying? There was no answer. The doctors looked at each other. Some lowered their eyes. Others pretended to study the data intently. The silence in the room grew deep and stifling. We can't make a diagnosis without reason, the neurologist finally said. We've ruled out stroke, tumor, infection, autoimmune reaction, everything. The father's voice trembled. And you've ruled out death? These words lingered in the air. No one dared to respond. Time was moving agonizingly slow. Every minute felt like an hour. Nurses were coming and going, changing drips. Doctors checked sensors, argued in whispers, returned to the bedside, then shook their heads. There was no solution. At that very moment, when tensions were surging, the room door opened with a silent, barely audible creak. No one immediately noticed. Everyone was lost in their screens and their own helplessness. A young girl, 22 years old, stood in the doorway, wearing a simple cleaner's uniform that was a little too big, with frayed sleeves. In her hands was a bucket and a mop. She had simply come to do her job, as she did every day, quietly, without interrupting anyone. Excuse me, she said softly. I just ... But her gaze lingered on the boy. Something in his face froze her. She didn't know who he was, nor how much he was worth. She didn't understand the instruments or the medical terms. She was just observing. The girl took a step forward, then another. The doctors were so engrossed in the debate that they didn't immediately notice the stranger. She stopped beside the bed and frowned. Her gaze slowly glided over the face, lips, neck, hands. She noticed how strangely the fingers lay, how the skin color on the wrists was different. She leaned in a little more, as if trying to remember something long forgotten. Hey, one of the doctors said irritably, finally looking at her. Get out immediately. The girl was startled, but didn't back down. She looked at the boy again and asked softly, almost in a whisper, did he eat anything different today? The ward fell silent. The doctors stared at her with surprise and irritation. That's not your case, another replied sharply. We're treating you here. We're not discussing food. I just asked ... double quotes, she said softly. I'm sorry ... She was about to leave, but her eyes fell back on the sheet, on the barely visible spots on the skin, on the thin, red lines that the doctors had interpreted as a reaction to the medication. To her, it looked like something else. This ... is and single quotes T an allergy. The words slipped out of her mouth. Involuntarily, the girl turned, looked at the manager, and paled, realizing what she had said. I ... I could be wrong, she said quickly. But I've seen this before. The doctors looked at each other. Listen, The cardiologist said sternly. "We appreciate your work, but now is not the time to speculate." The boy's father was silent. He was looking deeply at the girl, as if grasping for a last hope. "Where did you see this?" they asked. He asked, his voice hoarse. The girl cleared her throat. "In the village where I grew up," she replied. "There was a hospital. People often misinterpreted herbs, mushrooms. Double quotes. A boy had similar symptoms. He was also being treated incorrectly before. Several doctors paused, their eyebrows furrowed. Some automatically looked at the monitor, some at the child's hands. "Impossible," someone muttered. But double quotes. The department head slowly stood up straight. For the first time that day, something flashed in his eyes, a new suspicion. "Show me what you're talking about," he said, pausing. The girl carefully lifted the corner of the sheet, pointing to the same lines on the skin that no one had considered important. And in that moment, something changed in the room, neither on the screen nor in the analysis. In the air, as if that tiny detail, overlooked by 17 experts, had finally surfaced. The head of the department silently stared at the lines the girl had pointed out, as if seeing them for the first time. He wasn't in a hurry to argue. So much had been proven wrong today. One by one, the doctors approached the bed. They bent down and stared at what had seemed like a minor skin irritation a minute ago, suddenly taking on a different meaning. "Tingling in the fingers?" the girl asked softly, afraid of being met with another sharp retort. The nurse quickly flipped through the notes. "Yes, the child complained in the morning. We attributed it to dehydration." And double quotes. The girl continued. "Did he feel like he couldn't hear?" The ward fell silent. The resuscitator spoke softly. "There was a short-term numbness. Damn." The toxicologist bolted upright, as if electrocuted. He picked up the tablet and frantically searched for something, flipping through a sparse reference book. "It's a non-standard poison," he muttered. "That's why the tests were coming back clean. If that's right, then we were looking in the wrong place." "Who are you, in general?" he asked sharply, sounding professional. But his voice no longer held arrogance, only confusion. There was no answer. The girl simply said, "I just remembered." The manager stepped toward the boy's father. "We need to change the protocol immediately," he said softly. "There's a risk, but inaction now is more dangerous." The father didn't think twice. "Do everything," he said. "Whatever is necessary." The ward erupted in activity. Just a minute ago, the stillness that had been drenched in stillness now came alive. Buttons clicked, doors opened. The sound of rapid footsteps echoed through the corridor. Someone was being called over the intercom. Short, sharp orders were being given. An attempt was made to remove the girl, but the manager gestured to stop her. "Leave her there," he said. The toxicologist returned to the bed, his eyes wide with tension. "Natural poisoning," he said. "The symptoms are disguised as neurological and heart failure. If the antidote isn't given in time, breathing paralysis occurs." "How long?" the resuscitator asked. "An hour, maybe. The boy's father paled, but didn't take his eyes off his son. His lips trembled, but he held on with all his might. "Will we make it in time?" he asked, addressing no one in particular. "If he's right, yes," the manager replied. "If not. Double quotes. He stopped mid-sentence. Preparations for the antidote began on an emergency basis. The nurses worked silently, concentrated, as if every extra second could be fatal. The girl stood leaning against the wall, her hands pressed to her chest. She felt as if her heart would give out in a heartbeat. "And if I'm wrong?" she whispered. The father turned to her. "If you hadn't said anything," he replied softly, "he would have died. Whatever happens next, you've done more than many." These words gave her some solace. The first dose was administered slowly. Everyone's eyes were glued to the monitor. The heart rate line flickered, but didn't drop. A minute passed, a second, a third. "The pressure is stabilizing," the nurse said suddenly, unable to believe her eyes. "The saturation is rising," the resuscitator added. Silence descended on the ward again, but this silence was different, tense, and full of expectation. The doctor stood motionless, as if afraid they would scare him with what was happening. And then, the boy groaned softly, very softly, but the sound was loud enough to make many people gasp. "He's reacting." Someone's lips trembled. The child's fingers twitched slightly. His face slowly regained its color. The father couldn't bear it. He hid his face in his hands, and for the first time in his life, a stifled sob escaped his chest. "We made it," the manager said a few minutes later. The crisis had been averted. No one clapped or cheered. The joy here was almost sacred. The doctors looked at each other, reflecting both relief and embarrassment. 17 specialists, and an unknown girl. When the boy was transferred in stable condition and the ward was empty, the father came to him. He looked different now, not like a man accustomed to giving orders, but like an ordinary father. "What's your name?" he asked. "It doesn't matter," she replied, lowering her eyes. "It does matter to me," he said softly. "You saved my son's life." He shrugged. "I just said what I saw." He paused for a moment, then continued his art.